Today we're going to start a new lesson. We're going to be dealing with more algebra, and so we're going to, in this very first lesson, deal with evaluating numeric expressions. And we're going to really hit home on something called order of operations, which we have talked about in class, but we're going to get some practice with it. So we are in the M3-T1 tab, M3-T1 expressions, which you should have. I've put that there for you. And we're on lesson 1, evaluating numeric expressions. If you're in the workbook working, you're looking for M3-7. It's the other, it's volume 2 workbook, so it's the other workbook if you want to work that way. All right, we're going to skip some parts of this lesson. Relationships matter. We're going to skip through this first, getting started. And I want to talk really briefly and review very briefly with you about squares and cubes. We talked about those at the beginning of the year when we dealt with our geometry and exponents. So anytime you're seeing, we see them on our spiral reviews, those little tiny numbers that go with next to a bigger number, we call that an exponent. We call the base, or this number, the big number that sits there, we call that the base, and the power is whatever number it is. And so we pronounce this one 2 to the 4th power, and basically it's saying 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 2 is 16. So 2 to the 4th power equals 16. We can read it 2 to the 4th power. We could read it 2 to the power of 4. And this is what we deal with when we deal with exponents. We're going to start to see them a little bit more. And the main thing to remember with the exponents is to remember that it's not multiplying. In this case, it wouldn't be multiplying 7 times 5. It's saying 7 5 times, multiplied 5 times. So it says identify the base and the exponent in each power. Then write each power in words. So the base in this one would be 7, that's the big number, and the exponent would be the 5. And we'd say, we would call this 7 to the power of 5, or we could say 7 to the 5th power. This one, the base would be the big number, the 4, and the exponent would be the 8. And again, we could call this 4 to the 8th power, or we could say 4 to the power of 8. All right. So sometimes your base and your exponent make a perfect square or a perfect cube. So if you look here at these squares, you know they're squares because they have the same length sides. And so we call these perfect squares. And so we could represent them with an exponent by saying 9 to the power of 2. Or we could call it 9 squared. Why do we call it that? Well, because it makes a perfect square. Okay, this one could be called 2.75 to the power of 2, or we could call it 2.75 squared. Why? Because it makes a square. So that's why that can have a special term. Some of the areas, sometimes we call perfect squares because they're squares of an integer. For example, 9 is a perfect square because 3 times 3 equals 9. Or if you wanted to write it with exponents, you'd say 3 squared equals 9. Sometimes we can have a perfect cube, and that would be these guys, perfect cubes, because they all 3 have the same length side. So it's like saying 2 times 2 times 2 to find the volume, and we could represent that 2 to the power of 3, or 2 cubed. Why cubed? Because it makes a cube. Okay, this one we could call 4 cubed because it makes a cubed. And again, every single time you have the same numbers to the power of 3 or the power of 2, we can call them a perfect square or a perfect cube. A perfect cube would be one that has all three same, like we said. Okay, that's just a little review for us on that one. Let's skip down. We're going to skip activity 1.2 and 1.3. We're going to come down here, skip 1.4. We get to skip all this stuff. And we get to start here with activity 1.5, order of operations. There's a term, or there is an order of operations, an order in which operations are performed when evaluating any numeric expression. The order of operations is a set of rules that ensures the same result every single time. All right, so what is that order? Parentheses come first. Sometimes they'll call it grouping symbols. Exponents come next. Multiply or divide come next from left to right. Add and subtract are the last two things you do, whichever comes first, left to right. The little saying we have right here, we can say, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, with each of the very first letters being what we do and in what order. To remember, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, and division. You'll also sometimes see it written like this. PEMDAS. Now, if you can remember that and refer to that, it will help us to remember the order that we have to do. One thing, though, to remember, multiplication and division are of equal importance. You do whichever one comes first from left to right, and the same goes for addition and subtraction. Sometimes kids get caught in that. Okay, let's keep going. Let's see, evaluate each expression using order of operations. We're going to try it out. I'm going to write, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And first thing I want us to do is write down the order in which we're going to do things. So parentheses would be first. I don't see any parentheses. Exponents is next, and I do see exponents. So I'm going to write those down. I have to do that first. Multiply and divide comes next. There's no multiplying in this time, but there is divide, so I'm going to do that. And then add and subtract will come last. There's no adding, but there is subtracting, so I'm going to subtract last. Now, I don't have to do that part every time, but I'm going to do that to begin with so I can kind of keep straight what my steps are. So let's go ahead and do this. If I'm going to do the exponents first, that's these two, and I know that 2 squared, or 2 to the power of 2, is 2 times 2, that's 4. So I'm going to rewrite my equation. 28 divided by 4 minus 36 divided by, and instead of writing 3 to the second power, I'm going to say 3 times 3 is 9, and I'm going to write 9. All right, done with exponents. My next step is to divide. So that means I'm going to do this first and this second. So I'm going to divide 28 divided by 4, and that gives me 7. Subtract. And then I'm going to do 36 divided by 9, and that gives me 4. And I'm done with dividing. And the last thing I'm going to do is subtract 7 minus 4, and I'm going to get 3. To show my work on these, I'm going to write down every single step that I do. On the next one, what are we going to do first? Well, number 1, I see there's parentheses, so I'm going to have to do that. Number 2, are there any exponents? Yes, there are. So I'm going to do the exponents after I do the parentheses. Multiply and divide. There's only divide, so I'm going to do that. And then add and subtract, there's only add, so I'm going to do that afterwards. All right, let's get started. Parentheses is first, so I'm going to write what I have, 12 plus, and now I see the parentheses is 12 divided by 5, so it doesn't matter if it's divide, I have to do what's in parentheses, right? And so actually, because this divides in parentheses, I'm not even going to do it later on. So I have to do it now. Okay, so 25 divided by 5 is actually 5. And that exponent I keep, okay, because I haven't done anything with it yet. All I did was my parentheses. Next up is exponents. So I'm going to do the 12 plus, and instead of 5 to the second power, I'm going to say 5 times 5, which is 25. I didn't have to worry about the divide because I've already done it. And my last step is the add, and 12 plus 25 is going to be 37. All right, go ahead and try the next 3 on your own and pause the video, see if you can do them, and then come back and check. Okay, hopefully on this one you were able to get the steps correct. Let's see our order and see if we can get them in the right order. First thing I'm going to do, there is parentheses. So I'm definitely going to do the parentheses. There are exponents, and those exponents are in the parentheses. So let's see. The first thing I'm going to do is parentheses, and I'm going to do the exponent in the parentheses. Okay, after I get the parentheses and the exponents all done, there's multiplying and dividing. Yes, there is. There's multiplying. And then that's it. There's nothing else in there to do because I will have taken care of the subtraction when I do my parentheses. So let's get started. In the parentheses, so that's this whole part, I'm going to do what it says, and it says 12 to the second power minus 48. Okay, before I can do the minus, I have to do the exponent. And so 12 to the second power is 12 times 12. That's 144 minus 48 times 2. So I'm still going to keep my parentheses because I had to do that exponent in there first. All right, so then 144 minus 48 gives me 96 times 2. So now I'm done with the parentheses, I'm done with the exponent. My last thing to do is 96 times 2, and 96 times 2 is 192. Next one, there are no exponents, there's no parentheses. So the first thing I'm going to do is the exponents, and there's 2 of them. So I'm going to have to do both of them. After I get the exponents done, the next one is multiply or divide. There is some dividing to do. After I do multiply and divide, the last thing I do is the add and subtract. And it looks like there's both, but the first one that comes is the add. And then I'm going to do the subtract. So let's get to it. No parentheses, but exponents is my first thing. So I'm going to take 168 divided by 2 to the third power is like 2 times 2 times 2, which I know is 8, plus 3 to the third power is 3 times 3 times 3. Well, 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, minus 20. I'm done with my exponents, so next I do the divide, and I take 168 divided by 8, and I get 21. Rewrite everything else out. I'm done with that. Next is my add. So I add 21 plus 27, and I get 48. And then I subtract 48 minus 20, and I end up with 28. Last one. First thing I'm going to do is parentheses. Second thing I'm going to do is that exponent. Third thing is multiply and divide, and there is divide. And then the last thing I'm going to do is add and subtract. Well, this subtract is in the parentheses, so I don't have to worry about that. So the last thing I'm going to do is just add. Okay, in the parentheses, let's see, we have 10 divided by, what's in parentheses? 5 minus 3, that's 2. Done with that. Next step is exponents, so 10 divided by 2. 2 to the third power is 2 times 2 times 2, which I know is 8. Done with the exponent. Then I move on to divide. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Done with that, and add. 5 plus 8 is 13. And that's the order of operations. I think we're going to skip those for now. We don't need our expression cards right now. And that will be the end of our lesson. I hope you understand how to do the order of operations.